Hello, everyone. Welcome again to this week's online Parashah class. I'm Rabbi Ari Sachs of Congregation Beth Mordechai. I'm happy to be joined again by Walter Simons Rose. Welcome, Walter.
Hi.
And we're here to talk about this week's Torah portion of Parashat Lekh. As we mentioned last week, that we are beginning the middle cycle of the triennial cycle, meaning we read the second third of this week's Torah portion in order to read the entire Torah within 3 years. And this week's Torah portion of Parashat Lekh, especially the second third, begins with something that seemingly kind of, whether it's innocuous or just seemingly irrelevant or doesn't seem to necessarily connect, which is the wars of many different kings against one another seemingly within the land of Israel. And that we read a lot of these wars, of these battles fought by these kings, and only at the very end do we actually get to the point in which Abraham, or Abram at this time, actually makes a deal with a certain group of the kings, and then fights to defeat the other ones. And he becomes actually one of the most powerful men in all of the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, at this particular time, having lots of different land because of this battle. And so it seems that the battle is supposed to indicate to us that Abram becomes a player within the political realm, within the military realm of the land of Canaan, and so maybe that's what it's there for. But one other commentator, a modern commentator, actually thinks that there's actually something else there. Rather, that what the whole sort of battles do is that it actually leads us to understand that Abram decides to jump into this war that seemingly doesn't revolve around him because one of the kings holds his nephew Lot. And his nephew Lot is very important to Abram because, according to this commentator, that Abram does not actually have any children. And so Abram knows that the only way to continue his legacy is perhaps for Lot's children to actually inherit his particular legacy. Once the battle is over, once it's secured, we then read how Lot and Abram actually split ways. And at this point in time, where we're going to get to our main discussion in chapter 15, Abram seems a little distraught in the sense that he does not have a particular heir. He is very old and very concerned that there's no one going to be able to continue his legacy after he dies. So that's the background, all within this week's second third, to what the main topic of conversation is today, which is that out of this fear that Abram has with the fact that he has no children, that God comes to say, don't worry, we're going to work everything out. And so that's when we're going to take up from chapter 15 of the book of Genesis. So we're going to take one moment. I'm going to share where we are. Actually, while we wait, Walter, do you have any thoughts, both whether it's on this introduction or just in the Parsha in general?
I don't think so, Rabbi. Not yet.
Okay, no worries.
I'm curious where you're going to go with this.
So, you see the screen in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. So we get to chapter 15. I'm going to go through the list a little bit quickly to get to the main point of this chapter. After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield, thy reward shall be exceedingly great. This idea of God being a magen for Avram is the biblical source for the blessing that is made during the Amidah, in which we say that, but we bless God who is Magen Avraham. Magen Avraham, meaning that God is the shield of Abraham, that this is the source for that particular blessing. And Abram said, O Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing that I go childless? and he that shall be possessor of my house is Eliezer, meaning that he's worried that his servant is actually going to be the one who's going to possess his inheritance. And Abram said, Behold to me, thou hast given me no seed. Lo, no one born in my house is to be my heir. I'm going to die childless. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This man shall not be your heir, meaning Eliezer, your servant, is not going to be your heir, but rather, and to go to the Hebrew, Asher yetzeh mime'echa hu yirashecha. Rather, it is the one from your loins who shall actually be your heir. And so God is making clear in no uncertain terms that Abram does not have to worry that you're going to have a person you're going to have a child, someone who came from your own loins, who's going to become your heir. But for Abram, this seems to be a little bit. We read later on. We know the story, but learn later on of how Sarah thinks it's crazy, which is why she laughs when the angels come to appear before them. But that it seems that even for Abram, that this could be something that he does not necessarily believe at this point. So, verse 5. And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven and count the stars. Thou be able to count them. And he said unto them, So shall your seed be. So God is making this great promise that your people are going to be like the stars, as numerous as the stars in the sky. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. Now, we could stop the story right now. We could stop the story right now and to say Abram had faith that God was going to be able to follow through on this promise, and end this part of the story, move on to the next one. Everything seems fine. And in fact, that kind of seems what we're led to believe, in the sense that Abram was a faithful servant, was a religious person, and as a religious person, if God says this is going to happen, you trust it no matter what. Fair? It's fair? But that's not where the story stops. So, verse 7, And he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought you out of the Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. And he said, O Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? In other words, 2 verses before, Abram says, I believe you, God. But now he's saying, how do I know this is actually going to happen? So either this is a different tradition that's kind of put in here, in which Abram is one who has less faith. Maybe it's a continuation of that idea of him being faithful, in the sense that I have faith in you, but can you show me a little bit more? Can you tell me a little bit more about why it is that I know that this is going to happen, or how I can really trust that this is going to happen? So it's almost as if trust but verify for Abram when it comes to this promise by God. And he said unto him, Take me a heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each half over against the other. Vayivater otam batavech, vayiten ish bitro likrat re'ehu. And so what this idea of batar here is that he actually divided the sacrifices into 2. And what he did was, you can imagine, so if you want to take a look at the screen now, that what he did is he put the sacrifices, he put one half over here, and he put another half over here. So there's two different kinds of sacrifices. Question is, why do we have 2 different sacrifices? Why do we divide the sacrifices into 2 and split them? And the reason we're about to get to in just a moment. And I want to turn to the Hebrew now. Vayhi hashamesh lavo v'tardema nafla al Avram. And the sun went down, and a great sleep befell upon Abram. V'hine ema chashecha gedola nofelet alav. And a dread and even a great darkness fell upon him. Vayomer le'Avram yadoa teda ki ger yihiyeh zaracha. And God said to Abram, know that your seed shall be a stranger in a land, ba'aretz lo lahem, in a land that is not theirs, va'avadum ve'inu otam arba me'ot shana, and that they shall serve in this land for 400 years. This is the prophecy that in which the Israelites are going to go down and be enslaved in Egypt. And so we know that, according to the Torah, we know that slavery, which happens in the book of Exodus, was actually foretold to Abram. V'gam et hagoy asher ya'avodu dan anochi ve'acharechen yetzu birchush gadol. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. It's almost seemingly word for word what happens when it comes to Egypt, that the plagues come judge Egypt, and that the Israelites come with a great amount of their possessions as they move back, as they try to come back to their homeland. Ve'ata tavo el avotecha b'shalom tikaver b'seva tova. But you, Abraham, you go to your fathers in peace, meaning you're going to die in a good old age. So you don't have to worry about actually being enslaved. Dor revi'i yeshubu hena ki lo shalem avon ha'emori ad hena. And the fourth generation they shall come back hither, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. We could go into this prophecy in great detail, but the main point of what I want to focus on is not the actual words of this prophecy, but rather what happens after God makes not only this prophecy, but this promise to Abram. And that's in this verse, these next two verses. Vayhi hashemesh ba'a. And it came to pass that the sun came, or in translated here as it went down. Va'alata haya. And there was a thick darkness that came upon the land, seemingly very similar to the beginning of Abram's dream. V'hine tanur ashan, and here came a smoking oven, a smoking furnace. V'la pid esh, and a flaming torch. Asher avar bein hagezarim ha'ele, that passed between these two pieces, i.e. the different pieces of the sacrifice. So, let's just to recap for a moment. You have Abram being concerned that he has no children to continue his inheritance. God says, you're going to have children. On one hand, Abram says, I believe you. On the other hand, says, can you prove it to me? And then more elaborate prophecy, or elaborate promise by God, which includes, by the way, the slavery of the. And as soon as this is done, we then have this weird moment in which the sacrifices that Abram had divided into two, we now have this furnace and this torch that goes between them. So, Walter, what do you think that is?
Oh my gosh, Rabbi. I've seen this story so many times, and it's still, there's a lot to unpack in it.
Absolutely.
The first thing I wanted to comment on was the thing with the stars in the heaven.
Yeah.
That, I think that in itself is very interesting, just briefly, because back, when Abraham was alive, they didn't think there were that many stars in the sky. They didn't know that what we know today, that there were billions and billions.
Interesting.
So I think that's a very interesting observation. Another rabbi told me this observation, and that's interesting in itself. So that's number one. Number two, when you brought up that he trusted in Hashem at first, and then he went back.
Yeah.
But if you look at the text, I don't know if this actually matters, but maybe he believed him about the offspring thing, and then God says, okay, now I'm going to give you land. And that's when he questions. You're going to
Interesting.
give me children and you're going to give me the land?
Okay, so let's look at this. I'm going to share the screen so we can show everyone else who may be watching. Um, 1 second.
I think that's accurate.
Okay, so let's go to it. That is I see what you're saying. Well, because so it says, right, verse 5, look toward the
Right,
heavens, count your seed.
right,
Abram says, I believe you. Then God says, I'm going to give you this land to inherit. And then Abram responds is, how do I know that I will actually inherit it?
right. And he doesn't, and to be honest with you, God doesn't actually answer his question. He's talking more about, he seems to go into something that is totally unrelated to Abraham's question. He just asked him, how do I know I'm going to inherit the land? But I don't exactly see God,
God proving it.
you know, he just goes on to this thing about we're going to be enslaved in Egypt. I don't really see the connection here.
What would you want to see?
Oh, he does repeat the thing about the stars in the heaven.
Well,
I think.
he does. I mean, there's both elements that he repeats as well, meaning that you're going to both inherit this land and you're going to have many people to inherit it. I mean,
Okay,
the two are kind of interrelated.
right.
How could you not inherit the land if
If you
you,
didn't have it,
right?
right,
And if you have a lot of offspring, where are they going to live and what is their land going to be? So
right,
in a certain sense, it's a bit of a chicken and egg kind of a question in terms of, are they talking about the land or are they talking about the people who are going to inherit the land? Um, I do see your point, though, that they do kind of split it in regards to what Abram's belief is. Maybe he
no, but you're
believes,
totally right that they're related.
right? But you're also right that in the sense that that the Torah seems to split the issue, and that Abram trusts more that he's going to have seed, he's going to have people to inherit the land, but he doesn't necessarily know which land that's going to be, or that the proof that he's going to be able to conquer. Now, by the way, that in and of itself is interesting because it's kind of the reverse of what we'd expect given the rest of this parsha. I.e., in the rest of this parsha, Abram loses seemingly any chance he has of having inheritors because he splits with Lot. And number two, meaning that it might be very difficult for him to believe that he's going to that he's going to have inheritors. But he is in battle, he is very successful, meaning he controls a lot of the land. So why would he not believe that he's not going to be able to inherit the land from a military perspective? So but this whole concept of land and children is connected here, and I want to get to your other point though, because your point is really the crux of what we're talking about here. How does God actually prove to Abram that this is going to happen? And that's when it comes back to this idea of the flame of the furnace and the torch that pass between the pieces. And for that, we're going to look at some commentary. So, here's a very basic one from Sikta Zutrata, which is a medieval commentary, a medieval midrash. V'hinei tanur ashan velapid esh. Do you see it on your screen?
Yes, Rabbi.
Okay. Tanur ashan ze Gehenna. The burning furnace is Gehenna, is the Jewish version of hell, i.e., you can imagine a burning oven like it is seen in the movie theaters with, all this fire emanating, that it refers to hell. And the reason why, and we're going to get to sort of how they explain it, but seemingly the reason why other commentators point out that they believe that this place is considered to be Gehenna is a reminder to Abram that the other nations, the other kings, have been destroyed by him. So it kind of goes back to the point that Abraham was successful in leading in being victorious over these nations, over these kings, and so these kings are go up in flames, so to speak. And so they're the ones who are existing in this Gehenna. But how do they get it from the text? V'chein hu omer, and thus it says in the Bible, Asher or lo b'tzion, v'tanur lo b'Yerushalayim. And a light shall emanate, shall be in Zion, and a furnace shall be in Jerusalem. Seemingly in the sense that there will be this destruction of the land, a destruction of Jerusalem when the Israelites are not, because they're not following God's ways. So that the idea of all things sort of burning up and flames engulfing everything is a reference to I won't say to hell, but that the idea of a burning flame is representative of destruction, which I think is the most important part here. And what is this flaming torch? Velapid esh. Oppositely, it's zo Torah. This refers to Torah, as it is written in Devarim in Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 2. Mimino esh dat lamo. That on his right was this flame that belonged to him, which is seemingly referring to Torah. And if you want to, you can look up those verses to look more specifically at how it understands it in those contexts. But that the idea of an Aish as referring to Torah, it's not just there in many other places in rabbinic literature, that Torah is referred to as this holy flame, and the Tanur refers to as this hell. So you can see both of these sort of negative and positive aspects, which are kind of walking through or going through this, going between these different pieces. So that's the metaphors, okay, in regards to what these particular things are. But let's take it another step. What really is Torah? And what really is Gehenna?
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
We've explored the concept of that black fire on white fire.
Yeah.
With the Torah. So is
Yeah.
is that the Esh?
That's another rabbinic tradition around Torah being like fire. Yes.
Okay.
So in this case, in thinking about what the Torah and what Gehenna represent, we're going to turn to another commentary, this one of the Ramban of Nachmanides, to understand more about these particular elements and what they represent in terms of coming between the pieces. And I'm just going to read this in the English for the sake of brevity. And behold, a smoking furnace and a flaming torch. It appeared to Abraham as if the furnace was all smoke, and in its midst a flaming torch was burning, similar to a great smoke with a fire flashing up from the prophecy of Ezekiel. The smoke mentioned here is the cloud, and thick darkness mentioned at the giving of the Torah in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 11, meaning that there is a major difference between the Ramban Nachmanides and these other commentators who are looking at the oven and the flame as representing Gehenna and Torah, rather that these things are actually interrelated and that they're brought from the moment in which God gives the Torah in Deuteronomy. And the flaming torch in its midst is the fire mentioned there. And thou didst hear his words out of the midst of the fire in Deuteronomy. And it is further written, and the appearance of the glory of the eternal was like a devouring fire in Exodus. And I'm actually going to wrap it up with this next important line. Thus, the divine glory passed between the parts of the sacrifices. And this is the covenant which he made with Abraham forever. So the difference between the Ramban Nachmanides and other rabbis, including Psita Zutrata, who look at one of those pieces as the torch as Torah, and the other one is Gehanam, he sees it all as being representative of the kavod, of God's glory, which is the part of God that appears to the people when God decides to when God gave the Torah. And I think, though, that you can also read Gehanam and Torah as also representing part of God, meaning that if you feel my wrath, you will be sent to Gehanam, and if you come close to me, then I will give you Torah. So it's almost like the expansive reach of God is represented by these two things. Ramban has different proof texts for it, but the clear message here, I think the clear message here is that what is coming in between these pieces, these sacrifices, is whatever representative of God that human beings can connect with is coming through those pieces. Which leads to, I think, one of the most important questions that comes out of this text, and one that I think that we deal with, seemingly not necessarily every day, but especially if we want to be religious people, if we want to think about God in our lives, it's a question of, why does God show up here? We raised the point earlier that Abram actually at this point is not sure, whether that's he's not sure he's going to have children or he's not sure he's going to inherit the land. And Walter, you asked before, how does God seemingly answer that question? I think he's answering that question by showing up. He shows up in this particular ritual of coming in between the pieces. And this ritual is one that I don't want to say it was a popular one, but it is one that was known in the ancient Near East, that you walk through these sort of two burning sacrifices and you say, by walking between these two or by appearing between these different pieces, I hereby make a covenant between myself and God. But the difference here is that it's not Abraham walking through the covenant. Abraham's covenant is going to appear in the next couple of chapters when he does circumcision. That's his covenant to God, and that's what we do now. But rather, that it is in this moment, it is God who actually appears to Abram. We're not in search of God. We ask the question of God, how do we know? And as opposed to God saying, what do you mean, how do you know? Just trust me. God actually decides to show up and to show us that we can trust in God. And for that final point, I actually want to raise a beautiful teaching from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who wrote a fantastic book called God in Search of Man, in which he says the following that I think could really be applied to this moment in which God appears to Abram. I'm just going to share that with you. This is the core of all biblical thoughts. God is not a being detached from man to be sought after, but a power that seeks, pursues, and calls upon man. Israel's religion originated in the initiative of God, rather than in the efforts of man. That, I think, is an extremely powerful idea in which God is the pursuer. God is the one who wants to be in relationship with human beings. God is the one who wants to walk in between the covenants, and only then will Abram actually then do his own covenant with circumcision. So that in the answering to the question of how you're going to inherit the land, what's going to happen, in a certain sense, God knows unless I show my face, so to speak, because we can't see God's face, but unless I show myself, human beings are not going to believe me. Do you have any thoughts on that? Any interpretations? Any other
Kind of
points you'd like to
continuing.
raise?
It's just kind of continuing the theme we talked about last week, Rabbi. When you know, last week we kind of discussed how God felt distance from the people because the people were doing wrong things. They didn't know how to relate to Him, and
Mm,
that Noach did the sacrifice, and that kind of brought God down. Our relationship with God is becoming more cultivated, and so it's just kind of being further carried out by God's coming down again and showing us
mm.
doing this ritual with Abraham.
The one difference I would say, though, between what happened with Noah and what's happening here with Abram, but although it might be a result of what happened with Noah, is that Noah had to make the
Right,
sacrifice come down.
right,
Abram simply just asking the question, God, how do I know?
right, right. But I guess God's heart is still soft from that moment. He knows, the good in the people. He knows Abraham was trying to seek him. So, this is who God has chosen to be with and to carry on the legacy with.
Right. It's interesting. Maybe it's that God had, I like that kind of phrase you said of sort of God's heart is still softened. Maybe God has more faith in humanity than necessarily that God knows that we have in faith in him.
Right.
And that's why and God is always in search of man because of that, or maybe not faith in humanity, but of that desire to be close to humanity. And think I think that we have a similar feeling towards God. I think that we can cultivate a sense that, I want to be close to God. We may be far away from it. We may not always be able to access it. But I personally believe that for myself, and I think that for many others, and I hope most people, that there is this part of us that desires to be close to God, that has a soft spot in our hearts for God. And so whether it's God searching for us searching for God, there's definitely kind of like a back and forth there. It's not just one or the other. So maybe both of these stories are just indicating the softness that we feel for the presence of the other.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yes, I totally agree.
Awesome. That's awesome. Softness that we feel for the presence of the other. I like that. Okay. Um, so with that, many other questions? Any other thoughts you want to share? All good?
For now.
All right. Feel free to share more. You know, through all different kinds of social media. And I'll see you on Shabbat. But I want to thank everyone for coming and for enjoying this week's class. Take care and see you next week. All the best. Bye bye.